Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Officer Training School. My name is Joshua Joushi Howard and today we're going to be talking about Lord Solar Leontus. Lord Solar is definitely a unit that I see misused a lot whenever I'm watching games or whenever I happen to be playing a guard mirror, simply because he provides a lot to the army that a lot of players are not using to their full potential. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a much better idea of how to actually accomplish things with this unit in your games. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and talk about some other things. Firstly, if you see us talking about the winning guard list all the time, here's an example of what that might look like. I have a link down to my Ko-fi page down in the description where you can take a look at all of the lists, get a full breakdown of what everyone has been bringing for the past several patches, also what they played against, and how strong their opponents were on their way to their victories. It's a pay what you want, so you can get it for free if you'd like, but if you feel that it is worth, some amount of money, go ahead and click that link down below. Also, we've recently unlocked memberships. I definitely see more people who have gotten the membership who are not currently part of the Discord, so make sure if you are on Discord, you go click the gear for the settings and find connections. You should have the Discord pop up and you can automatically join it. Currently, members are getting access to these videos before they are released to the general public. So if you want to support me and get your content early, this is the way to do it. So today, as we're going to be talking about Lord Solar, we're going to be going over the basic things, right? We got to talk about the basics. Is he an auto-include? Do you have to include him in every single guard army? We'll talk about the different options you have for bodyguards for Lord Solar, a couple of different ways to use the redeploy, as well as going over the top with Lord Solar. It's important that you use Lord Solar, especially in turns 3, 4, and 5, to affect the rest of the board. Then we'll talk about the orders and stratagems you tend to use on this unit, and strategy on general ways to go about using Lord Solar to maximize his effectiveness. So to start off with, Lord Solar is one of the best force multipliers in the game. You have to remember that take aim on a lot of tanks is a 33% damage increase just right off the bat for everything that's hitting on 4s. Additionally, move is a massive, it is incalculably more valuable just being able to hit a lot of chargers and being able to shoot something as opposed to not being able to shoot something. That said, Lord Solar is 125 points currently. You need to be using his unit, especially if you're attaching him to a bodyguard, to be useful later on in the game. Otherwise, you're looking at 240 plus points that are not doing anything. You're playing at a pretty big disadvantage in a lot of your games. That said, Lord Solar is incredibly helpful for scoring in all the games. We'll talk about a couple ways that comes up. So to start off with, is Lord Solar an auto-include? As of when I was writing this guide, 45 of the 52 top placing lists, which you can find in the Ko-fi link down below, included Lord Solar. A massive majority of lists that are currently doing well with the guard are including Lord Solar, and most lists are improved by including him. He is the only model in the guard who can order certain types of units in the guard, including super heavies like the Baneblade, Bulgrin, Ogrin, and tank commanders, all of whom have neither the squadron nor the regiment keywords in their data sheets. So you cannot do it with tank commanders, you cannot do it with Ursula Creed, you cannot do it with command squads. It is only Lord Solar. Additionally, having CP every turn gives you easy access to the new order stratagem, and especially since the reinforcements nerf that happened in the Pariah Nexus battle slate, or whatever you want to call it, when Pariah Nexus came out, we could only use reinforcements one time, and suddenly we have a lot of extra CP, simply because we don't have very many good stratagems in the guard. The redeploy is also really efficient because it allows you to make a couple of tricks, which we will talk about later, and you can fix some deployment areas that you might have made earlier. He's also one of the most efficient sources of squadron orders. A tank commander with Grand Strategist costs 220 points currently for 2 squadron orders. That's 110 points per order. On the flip side, Lord Solar, if you don't take him with a bodyguard at 125 points, is about 40 points per order, and if you do include a bodyguard, suddenly you're looking at about 80 points per order for the squadron orders. So he's very efficient. He's a very strong force multiplier. However, there are reasons to not take him, and as evidenced by the fact that there are players who are doing very well without bringing Lord Solar, here's a couple of the reasons why you tend not to see him. The first one is in some GT mission packs where you're going to be playing 5 games, you generally know what the missions are that you're going to be playing before you actually show up. And so if you know that you're going to be playing with mission rules like raise banners, stalwarts, and swift action, battle line signs become more valuable. They're also really valuable for the purpose of secret missions, simply because you can revive them and then put them in your opponent's deployment zone at the very end of the game for a very easy war of attrition. And you can't have your scions be battle line if you have the Lord Solar because he must be your warlord. We have seen a couple of other archetypes where it's just not necessary to bring them because all the data sheets you're bringing are so efficient already and they don't rely on orders that sometimes you don't always need to do it, especially if you're playing certain mechanized archetypes where he can't necessarily safely keep up with everything that wants to be on the front lines. Ultimately, though, by default, especially if you are a newer guard player, I would strongly recommend including Lord Solar in your lists just because he makes the game so much easier. There are strong ways to play without him, but you need a strong game plan that very specifically doesn't need Lord Solar to work in order to justify not taking him. Lord Solar is almost always brought with a bodyguard, so let's go ahead and talk about the different bodyguards that we can bring. The most important reason why you generally want to have a bodyguard for Lord Solar is because if you attach him to a unit that has a Master Vox in it, which is a command squad, it allows Lord Solar to use that Master Vox and give orders up to 24 inches away. On most boards, this will reach out and touch your natural expansion, the middle objective, and sometimes even your opponent's natural expansion as well. This is a massive portion of the board, and so you don't necessarily need to worry very much about whether or not your units are going to be in order range. They just are going to be. In order to do this, you need to attach both the command squad and Lord Solar to a battle line unit. And I've seen some people talk about bringing a 20-man unit of Krieg or infantry. I'm going to strongly recommend against this if you're trying to play in tournaments, but there are some cute combos that you can do, which we won't be talking about in this video. So the first option that we have, and the most common one that you will generally see amongst newer players, is you take a unit of Cadian shock troops and a Cadian command squad. This is most common simply because you get all of this in a combat patrol. There are a couple of pros to taking this that the other versions of the bodyguard do not. Firstly, the Cadian shock troops come with a sticky objective. This is very helpful when we go over the top and actually take this unit out onto the rest of the board later in the game. But it also has ignore mods, so you still have OC if you have the regimental standard and you become battle shocked, so you will still hold your home objective no matter what. There are a couple of cons to this though. The first one is that it is the most expensive at 60 points for the Cadian shock troops and 65 points for the Cadian command squad. And you also don't have mortar for pointing and clicking your fields of fire. You don't have the same kind of ability to just reach out and hit whatever target you want with a free stratagem. Amongst top players, you're generally seeing this taking about 20% of the time for people who are going X and 1 or better. The most popular option by far is you take a Catachan jungle fighters and a platoon command squad. The major reasons that you see this one is because of the Catachan rule. Whenever you are charged or you charge your opponent, you get an extra strength and an extra AP on your melee attack. And Lord Solar going from strength 6 AP2 to strength 7 AP3 is really nice. Strength 7 suddenly means that you're winning the heaviest things in the game on 5s instead of on 6s. And also AP3 is a really big deal when you're actually going into things that don't have an invul save. You also, with the platoon command squad, almost always bring a mortar such that you can reach out and hit things with fields of fire anywhere on the board. However, the major downside to this is you will need something to hold your home later on in the game. And oftentimes, by the time Lord Solar is going over the top, you don't have enough things left in your army to just sit on your home objective. So you do have to have a little bit of planning ahead on how you're going to be scoring primary on turns 4 and 5. The one that is least common amongst top players is a Death Corps of Krieg and Platoon Command Squad. The main reason why you would consider bringing this is if there is a lot of indirect in your current meta. If there's a lot of people bringing mortars or whirlwinds or dark reapers or basilisks, it makes it incredibly tough for them to be killed off by these indirect pieces because you're going to be rezzing D3 models per turn. And that's going to be neutralizing about one indirect piece every round of shooting. The downside to this is it is also tied for the most expensive because the Death Corps of Krieg currently costs 65 and the Platoon Command Squad costs 60. Another one that is fairly common that you'll see is an infantry squad and a platoon command squad. There's a couple options that you have here. Firstly, you can take 2 mortars, which is nice for harassing small chaff units. The other major value that you can get from this is the infantry squad can take a mortar and allows your platoon command squad to take a regimental standard for the same value that you get from the Cadian command squad. The downside is that it doesn't really do anything else. If you really value having that mortar for fields of fire and also bringing the regimental standard, you can. Or if there's a lot of chaff where hitting them with mortars is valuable, you can also consider this one. And it's taken about 29% of the time. I've had a couple people ask about Ogryn bodyguards and whether or not you would attach them to Solar. And the general answer is usually not. In fact, I don't think I've seen a single combination of this go X and 1 at a major event. However, Paul Clifton in China will run Lord Solar, a platoon command squad with maximum chainswords, Catachan, and an Ogryn bodyguard, as a cheaper version of Strachan and Norik as these bash buddies. It's not quite as powerful, but it's decent and it will still punch holes in weakened units later on in the game. It's important to remember that the toughness 6 of the Ogren Bodyguard does not come up until the battle line unit is dead, at which point Lord Solar is no longer attached to the Ogren Bodyguard. Now, there's also an option to take no Bodyguard with Lord Solar. While this is possible, I would not recommend playing solo Solar in games until you're already a fairly decent player. If you're going 3-0 at your RTTs or 3-2 at GTs, you can do it. But before that, it is just really punishing to lose Lord Solar in a lot of lists that would otherwise take him. If you are interested in trying to make this work, remember that Lord Solar moves very quickly, 12 inches base, and can make himself move 15 inches. And the major thing that you have to do is you have to plan every single turn on where your units are going to be at the end of their movement phase, such that Lord Solar can be within 6 inches of a lot of different units. Because when he's going solo, he does not have access to the 24-inch range of the Master Fox. Next, let's talk about using the redeploy. The first way that you can use the redeploy is with infiltrators, namely Gaunt's Ghosts and Ratling. If you win the Defender roll-off, oftentimes you'll take Gaunt's Ghosts or Ratlings and use them to screen out your opponent's infiltrators and make sure that they cannot put any infiltrators in places that are going to be really difficult for you to dig out. This is oftentimes on their natural objective where you want to make them move something onto that objective rather than just sitting on it for free for the entire game and forcing you to try and dig them out. However, once they've done this job, usually they've done what they need to already. They no longer need to be in that position. So you can use Lord Solar's redeploy to take Gaunt's Ghost and deploy them to somewhere safe. Or if your opponent has a lot of scout moves, like playing into Tau or World Eaters, you can move the Ratlings somewhere else such that your opponent cannot actually make use of that scout move. There's a diagram on screen if you're interested in what that might look like. Another trick that I use all the time is with Rough Riders and Legionnaires battle tanks as the best targets. What you'll generally do is you'll deploy them aggressively initially. You'll put them right out in the open. And then you'll wait to see, does your opponent respect the fact that on deployments like Search and Destroy, it's a 12-inch move and then a charge. You can get really deep into your opponent's deployment zone with Rough Riders if you do end up doing this. And you can tag and do a lot of damage to a bunch of different parts of your opponent's army this way. Then you have to make a decision. Did my opponent respect this? In which case, you automatically just reserve them. Or sometimes you have to ask yourself, is it worth the gamble on going first? Because generally, if you go second, this Rough Rider unit is going to die to any army that has even reasonable shooting. However, this isn't a problem. We just take them and redeploy them into strategic reserves where they suddenly serve a rapid ingress threat. Another easy example of this is the fake flank. You can take units like Bulgrin or Rogel Dorns or just really heavy pieces of your army and over-deploy them on one side of the board. This can allow you to deploy them really aggressively and wait to see how your opponent is going to be deploying. If they respect it and instead are playing towards another side of the board and you need to react to that, what you can do is you can just pick up these pieces, move them, redeploy them to another part of the board, and then you can play a more balanced style of the game. You can also do this in reverse. If you deploy in a more balanced game, sometimes you'll find that your opponent has fully deployed to only play for one side of the board. And what you can do in these kinds of games is you can go from a balanced deployment to a very overstacked one side of the board all at once. This tends to be less useful against stronger opponents because they'll oftentimes call your bluff. Overplaying for one side of the board will oftentimes just lead to a very natural split where your opponent can overplay for the other side of the board. So you have to be very careful about having very detailed game plans if you're trying to do this as more than a gimmick. A fun example of this is a strong player in the South United States called Chris Daly, who talks about using the Provocative Dorn. And what you do with the Provocative Dorn is you take a Rogel Dorn and you put it in an open firing lane and you see how your opponent reacts. If they put enough firepower to actually kill it turn 1, then you just redeploy it somewhere safe. But if they don't, now you have a Dorn that effectively got an extra turn of movement, and you can play much more aggressively this way into the right opponents. Okay, one of the most important parts of actually playing Lord Solar effectively is understanding how to go over the top. What I mean by this is generally when you're playing a game for turns 1, 2, and 3, you usually need Lord Solar and his large bodyguard unit to zone out most of the board, especially in your backfield, to just screen out deep strikes, up downs, and anything that's going to come in and threaten your home objective. You can generally, on most Games Workshop and WTC terrain, prevent an opponent from coming into almost a quarter of the board with the Lord Solar unit. However, many armies and many lists do not have access to reinforcements or reserves after turn 3. At which point, it's no longer very important to screen out our backfield because our opponent cannot get there. So, the Lord Solar unit needs to move out from your base to the middle of the board. Remember, a Lord Solar command brick costs at least 240 points that we need to get value out of. At the same time, a brick with the regimental standard represents 43 OC or 59 with duty and honor. Also, Lord Solar, an Acadian commander or a platoon commander, have the equivalent of 9 power fist attacks. This isn't a lot early in the game, but on turns 4 and 5, when both armies are running out of things, just having this really big unit with a lot of OC, decent melee, and reasonable shooting suddenly becomes really effective. You have to remember that Lord Solar does have fairly decent melee, like we said. 6 Power Fist attacks hitting on 2s is not bad. And a unit of Solar and Platoon Command Squad and Catachan Break, if it's just a normal sit on your home objective backline, is going to kill about 5 Marines when they actually go to charge. That's not bad, especially later in the game. The exact same unit will also do about 4 wounds to a Leman Russ on the charge. It's not a lot of damage, but it usually doesn't need to be because you just have a lot of bodies with a 6-up feel no pain that are going to take a lot for your opponents to remove later on. It's also worth noting that some missions really necessitate that you go over the top at certain points in the game. On the mission The Ritual, you don't need to hold your home objective at all, so you can use the Lord Solar Brick to move off to the side and use that to set up multiple objectives in a different part of the board and just let your opponent have your backfield if you really need to. Conversely, on supply drop, 43 OC, especially if you go second, is going to hold basically every point that you can think of. So using Lord Solar's unit to score you 15 points of primary at the end of the game on supply drop can swing a lot of games. Another mission rule that actually comes up fairly often is if you do it right and start moving at the right time, you can string out Lord Solar and his unit, which is all battle line, to touch all 3 No Man's Land objectives and potentially score raised banners on all the No Man's Land objectives at the end of the game. It's not a lot of points, but 3 points is nothing to sneeze at. So moving on to orders and stratagems that you tend to use on Lord Solar, move, move, move is the most important one to know when to use. If you need to move the Lord Solar unit around at all, it's usually move, move, move because he's hitting on 2s in melee and hitting on 2s in shooting as well. But remember, because he is a mounted unit himself, he has to go around walls, so he is generally more bound by maintaining coherency with the rest of the unit, which can only move 6 or 9 inches. Any other order that you would give to Lord Solar is not really an order that you're giving to Lord Solar, instead it's an order you're giving towards the rest of his unit. For instance, take aim is your go-to if you're going to be shooting with the mortars so that they're hitting on 4s. First rank fire, second rank fire is better damage for your las guns if you're going to be shooting with those. Duty on honor is neat if you need to be maximum OC or leadership 5, but it doesn't come up that often. And then take cover is not bad if you don't have mortars and you just have an extra order lying around to try and minimize any possible damage that could come your way. Other stratagems that you really need to remember are Inspired Command. Rules as written, you do need to save orders for this to work, so it doesn't come up nearly as often as it used to in Leviathan. But the most important part of it is you have to remember that Inspired Command targets the officer giving the order, not the unit being ordered. This is generally really useful if your opponent is currently scoring primary on an objective, but you have enough models on there that giving duty and honor would deny them 5 VP on that objective. Just remember, you do have to be within 24 inches of the Lord Solar in order to actually give that order. The other one that you'll see sometimes come up is Heroic Intervention. Especially after you've gone over the top, Heroic Intervention is just extra movement for Lord Solar because he's got all these mooks behind him that are the ones who are going to die first. So let's go ahead and finish this up by talking about some strategy that you need to think about when you are thinking about putting Lord Solar in your list or actually playing him on the table. The first thing is that Lord Solar enables other units. There are a lot of good units in the Guard that are made much more effective by having Lord Solar. Remember, Bulgrin, Ogrin, Super Heavies, and Take Commanders can only be ordered by having a Lord Solar in your army. Giving Bulgrin move, move, move is one of the most effective things you can do in the game. Additionally, if you're playing a Storm Sword or a Bane Blade or any other Super Heavy, you damn well want to give it Take Aim so that every single gun on that model is currently hitting on a 3 instead of hitting on a 4. Also, aircraft. They're currently not very good, but they don't have squadron keywords, so if you ever want to play aircraft, you usually want to have Lord Solar to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. Other units that really enjoy having Lord Solar, as we talked about before, Gaunt's Ghost having the redeploy allows you to play some tricks with the unit, but Leman Russes and Rogel Dorans, which are already pretty stat efficient, become so much more stat efficient when they have the take aim order. And Lord Solar is the most efficient way to give them orders. Another major thing to keep in mind is that While it is tough for a lot of armies to kill Lord Solar, it's not impossible. So, especially against armies that have a lot of indirect, aircraft, or 3-inch deep strikes, which can threaten your Lord Solar, make sure you move Lord Solar into positions where he is still going to be relevant on the next turn. If your opponent knows that even if they kill Lord Solar's bodyguard, that he is going to be within 6 inches of 2 Rogel Thorns and a unit of Bulgrin, oftentimes they'll just leave him alive because they know that he's still going to be effective the next turn anyway. Remember, the threat is just as powerful as the execution. Lord Solar is also one of our best scoring pieces. Not because he's actually doing the scoring himself, but rather he guarantees that we have CP every turn. A lot of armies have to discard tactical cards in order to get bonus CP. But we don't have to do that if we have Lord Solar. In general, if you draw cards and you can't score it, you're going to want to redraw it, unless you have a specific plan that you need the command points for. Sometimes you need to make sure you have 3 CP to use Smoke and Armored Might on a target, or sometimes you just need to have 2 CP to use Reinforcements on something you want a second go with. But if you don't, redrawing those cards will usually net you more VP on average than not doing so. Also, depending on what mission pack you're playing, you can consider going fixed objectives rather than tactical objectives, since we don't rely on the tactical cards for CP generation. This was pretty strong in Leviathan when deployed teleport homers allowed you to get a lot of points just by being within 6 inches of the center, and then you could bring it down against Tau or Knights. However, this is not very strong in Pariah Nexus, but still something to kind of think about with your opponent. If there's ever an opportunity to do it, Lord Solar will allow us to do it when some other armies could not. Lastly, this one's pretty obvious, but make sure that you take Lord Solar and his bodyguard and you spread them out. Don't bunch them up all in one place because you minimize the amount of area that they're currently screening. Use the 2-inch coherency to string out long lines of guys to prevent anything from getting set up in your deployment zone. This will prevent rapid ingresses, deep strikes, and a lot of other nasty things from coming onto your side of the board when they shouldn't be able to. Just make sure when you do this that you're not moving your guys into positions such that they can get shot. As we go ahead and close out, the biggest thing I would remind you is one of the major skills that will take a lot of guard players from being a 1-4 or 2-3 player in the guard is understanding how to go over the top with their Lord Solar unit. So get some practice in. Remember that if you're going second, you can do it in the bottom of 3 rather than at the top of 4, which will give you a bit more freedom with how to use the unit. But even if you're a more seasoned guard player, I hope you learned something watching this video. This has been Josh with Joushi Howard. We've been talking about Lord Solar Leontus, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.